Hi, my name is Chris Dixon. This is the A16Z video series. Today I'm here with Nathan and Diogo from Anchorage, a crypto custody company that we're investors in. And so we're going to talk a little bit about how you guys got into custody, what is custody. There's also was recently an announcement that you're involved with the Facebook blockchain project called Libra, and we're going to talk about that too. Maybe if you could start with a little bit of your backgrounds, how you got into security, your time at Square, and then how that led to Anchorage.
That's a fun story. I think every time we talk about this story, it really is more than Anchorage. It ends up being how Nathan and I actually met. The story there actually goes back 9 years ago at this point. We met because we joined a company called Square the same week. Before joining Square, Nathan was working on something called anti-reverse engineering. So a very niche subfield of security in which imagine that you leave a tank behind enemy lines. You want to make sure that the enemy cannot reverse engineer the IP and the actual software in this tank.
Cool.
And I was working on something that was candidly very useless back then, 12 years ago, which was a PhD in distributed systems. So it turns out that there's some utility 12 years later about this, publishing academic papers in Byzantine fault tolerance and working on hashed cache and working on distributed randomness. So that's how we got to meet. We joined Square the same week, and then over the next 4 years.
So this was 2010?
It was early 2011, so
Yep.
March,
Okay.
if I'm correct. The fun part was that immediately we came into a company that did not have an encrypted credit card reader, and so.
How many people was Square then?
Square was around 45.
Yeah, pretty small still.
Yeah, and so we were just tasked with, the first thing that we did was we actually were part of the team that created the little encrypted credit card reader that I'm sure you've used before.
Yep.
So we actually are on the patent for that, so that's pretty cool. It's a cool claim to fame that we usually tell people. And so for 4 years we just worked together on everything. And so we were, at the end of it, Square was a lot larger organization, and we were leading the security team. And throughout those 4 years, we worked on everything, candidly. We worked on hardware security modules, the systems that integrate with all the payment card networks, worked on integrations with ACH, with Swift. We work on implementing projects around chip and pin, on just general infrastructure, operational security. So anything that touched security in one way or another. We actually set up the original cameras, the safety deposit boxes in the vaults that Square used, and even like the physical security of the office of access control of the actual cards to the access.
Security must have been a huge investment at a company like Square.
Yeah, Square, if I remember correctly, there was being bashed in the media when we joined because they were offering out free credit card skimmers. That was the narrative that was being tried to push out. And so there was a lot of focus on over-investing in security and really bringing people that could just heavily develop these platforms and making sure that we were prepared for the future. It was actually Square, the first company that we were part of, that had this narrative of every single security person must also be and meet the bar, if not exceed, of software engineering. And so as security engineers, we're actually building the platform that all the other engineers used for security. And so Square still, to this day, has that kind of culture.
As opposed to sort of separating the two and having security people watch over the software engineers?
That's right. Basically what happens...
Sort of a deeper integration between the two teams, yeah.
Sometimes what people tend to do is they have a security team, and the security team is somehow isolated from the engineering team. And so what you have is you don't have alignment of incentives, because if you have security engineers, or if you have a security team that is not actually doing engineering, the engineers themselves don't actually respect the security team. And so when they hear a no, you can't do this, then immediately you create a rift in between the cultures of the company. So we had a couple of policies on the team. One of them was get to yes. So we never said no. We always try to create the equivalent of a yes, but. And the second component is that every single security person also does engineering work and participates in the platform. That meant that we were actually managing the services that every engineer had depended on. So if their service had to have 5 nines availability, ours had to have 6. And so that's how we gained a lot of respect from the rest of the team and how the company was actually scaled out.
And then you were at Docker, and can you talk a little bit about that, and then also then how that led to Anchorage?
Sure. So after a number of years at Square, we were given the opportunity to kind of grow the security team at Docker, kind of from its initiation. Docker was a really great opportunity for us because it was kind of an opportunity to focus on security at scale and kind of take those lessons that we'd learned about microservices and infrastructure security at Square, and kind of put those into a platform like Docker that is now used widely across the internet between the cloud providers, many of the government agencies. A lot of folks are using Docker now, and the opportunity to kind of have that security go through all of Docker was pretty big for us. And a big thing that was pretty cool that we learned both at Square and Docker was this embedding model, the security engineering model, which really allows you to, if you're really effective at it and your security engineers are really effective, then everybody in the organization becomes a security engineer. Because the ways of doing things, the ways of operating kind of get embedded into everything that is happening.
So it becomes kind of a culture, a security-oriented culture.
Totally a culture. And that's the culture that we're trying to create at Anchorage is one where everybody is a security engineer. Security is the responsibility of everybody in the company.
That's what's so hard about security. One of the many hard things about security, right, is you just need one door to get left open, quote unquote, right? So one bug in the code, right? So, I mean, and you can do things to kind of overlay protections, but in the end, you need a kind of deeply embedded kind of cultural awareness to put security as a top priority.
Absolutely, you want it to be kind of across the board, all engineers, and even the folks that aren't in engineering but depend on the work of engineering, have them focus on security, and then as much as possible build layers so that there's no one system that can break. That you kind of have a crash resistance.
Yeah.
One of the things we like to talk about is in software engineering organizations, you want to be able to go fast, but you also want to go safely. And so one of the things we've done in the past is we've gone to the Indy 500, and we think that Indy 500 cars provide a really good model for that. Their express purpose is to go really fast, but when things go bad, the driver still survives because of all of the safety features, all of the safety mechanisms that have been put into those cars. We think that provides a really good model for how you should think about security engineering.
Yep.
Allow it to be secure, safe, even in the face of disastrous failures.
So how'd you guys start Anchorage?
So Anchorage was an interesting one because we were at Docker, and what started happening was the run-up of prices of 2017, as you were very well aware, brought a lot of people to the space, and in particular brought investors. And there were a lot of investors starting out to invest in these crypto assets that didn't really know how to do private keys. And I say it this way because they didn't know how to do anything about private keys. Generate them safely, custody them, obviously protect them against intrusion, back them up. So all of the basic components of just business continuity were not being followed. So we started having people just like contact us and calling us for help with just how do we do key generation, how do we actually keep these things safely. People were losing the passphrases.
When you had worked on the standard for the Glacier protocol, right?
Right, so we became maintainers of the Glacier protocol, which is the golden standard for individual custody of Bitcoin.
For cold storage.
For cold storage.
Meaning printed out, sort of the human protocol, the human and machine protocol for doing that safely.
That's correct. So eternally quarantine hardware, buy a laptop, take out the Wi-Fi card, print these things in QR codes, and then kind of like use that air gapping mechanism of the QR code confirmation to actually send to online computers the transactions. So we were deeply aware of how cold storage has evolved. We've participated in it actively. And in fact, we consulted for these companies doing exactly that. We helped them with cold storage. But then it became immediately obvious that the solutions that were in the space in cold storage itself was not sufficient for organizations. So organizations cannot wait 48 hours to actually access their vaults, to go somewhere in Switzerland and fly around and collect these USB keys to move their assets, because the volatility of the assets is such that they want to take advantage of the opportunities that Bitcoin or Ethereum or what have you is up 15% or down 15%. And that started becoming immediately more obvious once you start considering that all of these new networks that are actually coming up and being designed in 2017 were all transitioning from proof of work to proof of stake. They were now requiring you to do some kind of on-chain governance. You had Maker already that required and was already talking about governance decisions on how to stabilize DAI. You were having Tezos, which was very popular at the time, being talked about how they actually had governance on the protocol itself, and that there were updates on the network that were voted by the actual holders. So all these things were happening, and it was very clear that cold storage was not the right solution for investors. So Anchorage is born out of this. It is born out of the frustration of doing cold storage solutions as consultants to these crypto funds and realizing that cold storage just simply does not work.
And so when we think about custody in the non-crypto world, it mostly means storing stuff, like security and storing stuff, right? so whether it be sort of gold in a vault or something like State Street storing sort of digital dollars or
Right.
stock certificates or whatever it is. I guess your vision of custody is more than simply storing things, right? And so you mentioned governance, staking. Like, can you talk a little bit about how you sort of envision the custody market in crypto evolving?
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess the status quo, maybe we start by the status quo. What is the status quo? The status quo is people invest in crypto assets and then they do what we call pirate custody. And we call it pirate custody because if you think about it, it is the same technology that the pirates used in the 1700s to protect their gold coins.
Yeah.
It is gold coins inside of treasure chests that are buried in islands, and then there's a treasure map that you follow around to actually see where your gold coins are hidden. But instead of gold coins, you now have USB keys with private keys. And instead of treasure chests, you have safety deposit boxes. Instead of an island, you have some mountain somewhere in Switzerland. And instead of just a treasure map, now you have a checklist that humans are supposed to follow to do these things right. And so this is what the status quo is. And with all of these new protocols that require you to actively participate, so the keys now have to be online in one way or another. There's a lot of different systems that have delegation keys and have the ability of delegating certain responsibilities to different keys, but ultimately something needs to be online.
Just to explain, the idea is that these new networks, part of the idea is that the token holders can participate both in sort of helping to govern the system. So you mentioned Maker, where the token holders essentially vote on certain key parameters in the system that help govern the system. In a system like Cosmos or Tezos, by having tokens and staking them, and with what are called validators, you help to kind of operate the network, and in exchange for that, you earn sort of interest or returns.
That's right.
Yeah, and so these are sort of moving beyond in the Bitcoin kind of concept where you just simply have the keys, and you can go. Maybe the pirate model works reasonably well there. You can go hide them. At least for some people, right? It works, and it worked in the early stages in the kind of cypherpunk stage. But as this stuff goes mainstream, presumably people will want kind of a more secure and reliable type of storage, but also they'll want to use these more advanced features of the new proof of stake networks.
Yeah, ultimately what we talk about is people are designing networks that have certain characteristics. It makes no sense that investors don't get to take advantage of them. And in fact, one of the things that Nathan talks about all the time is how investors must meet fiduciary obligations.
Yeah.
Their LPs expect them to actively participate in this protocol. Imagine that you're investing in Ford, but somehow you're dropping the dividends of Ford on the floor. Or you're participating in some decision of the network. You're not actually voting on who's going to be the CEO.
Yeah.
So this is obviously not meeting your fiduciary obligations. And so,
one of the interesting things is in traditional venture capital, institutions like us, like Andreessen Horowitz, would invest in startups like Lyft or something, and then other institutions invest, and then 7 years later, retail investors, when those companies go public, might get the chance to invest, right? Crypto's been really kind of the opposite, where it's been led by kind of the fringes and programmers and random people on the internet. But institutions haven't participated partly because of these roadblocks, including custody, right? I mean, so I guess, do you see, what role do you see custody in kind of unlocking the broader adoption of crypto assets?
I think one of the things that's interesting there, just to what Diogo was saying earlier, is institutions have a set of expectations that they have around their custodians. If you look at the large custodians that exist, they not only help you hold the assets, they help you vote in proxy voting setting. They help you collect dividends. They help you utilize your assets to the degree that they are utilized. Say, for example, if there's a fork or some sort of in the traditional securities, you would look at that as a stock split or a dividend or stock dividend, whatever the case may be. So there's an expectation that all of those kind of features are available and available to institutional investors. And so when they're coming into this new space, a lot of times if they're looking at the pirate custody model, they're being told, well, we're going to take this asset and you're not ever going to be able to trade it because it's going to be stuck, and you're not really going to be able to use it for any of the reasons that you'd want to. And so just getting to the set of features that they already expect is pretty important. And then you layer on the fact that they actually need that to be done within a regulated institution as well. They need a qualified custodian in order to hold those assets. It layers on a whole entire additional layer of complexity where they want to see operational due diligence, they want to see you have a really good relationship with regulators, and they want to see kind of a really adult, grown-up institution in a lot of ways. And so that's really what they're looking for, is the combination of tech-forward firm that has the regulations and is able to meet kind of all of the needs that they have.
Yeah.
So one of the curious things that we've realized is people keep talking about how institutions are coming. What we see at Anchorage is that institutions are already here. They just don't have all of the feature set, and they don't have all of the feature set that they need and the services within one single institution that is also a regulated institution. So part of the things that we see Anchorage doing to the industry is obviously providing more confidence to these new investors and providing the confidence for investors that are not in the ecosystem itself to understand that this is a well-regulated institution with rules and clarity, and that it actually allows them to have the same set of features that they're expecting from the normal assets that they're accustomed to investing in.
Yep. They say the other thing there is like it is likely that institutions will hold significant positions in a lot of these cryptocurrencies, and to the degree that there are institutions that are holding significant positions and there are active participation requirements, is truly the responsibility of the custodians to help run the networks. Like you're saying, whether it's staking or voting, many of these networks have kind of as a core feature this idea that you can actually participate in the network. And if a bunch of assets are locked up in a way that you actually can't participate, then it kind of hurts the entire core thesis of what we're trying to do with crypto. The whole idea here is that we need to be able to use these things and use them effectively in the networks. And we're seeing that both with some of the existing coins and some of the new ones that are coming out as well.
I think a good example of that is obviously Maker, right? We've seen turnouts of votes in Maker that were not ideal from a percentage of participation perspective. And if you ask investors why they're not voting, they tell you that they don't have a safe way of doing it. And they are restricted from voting on these networks, and they're restricted from actively participating because they're afraid of something very basic, which is they're afraid of losing all their assets. Yep. So if you're afraid of losing your assets, you're not going to actively participate in any of the governance protocols. And that's always going to be left to the niche players or the retail that have a lot higher risk tolerance.
And so it should be completely safe and as easy as tapping a button on your iPhone, right?
That's correct. And so it should actually also be as secure as the custody of your funds and should not be compromised for the fact that you're voting. And so a lot of these things are very complex, of course. And if you think about a lot of these active participations, a lot of them are, for example, in the case of Maker, they're based on Solidity smart contracts, they're ERC20 tokens, and there's a lot of layered complexity on these contracts themselves. So it takes deep review, it takes a lot of work to understand what are the ways to interact in a safe manner with these contracts that actually require you to do things that are very unnatural. They force you to lock your funds in, and then only after your funds are locked, you can actually participate in the governance decisions, and you have to keep the funds locked while the vote is ongoing, and if you actually unlock the funds, then your percentage of the vote is actually removed. So there's a lot of complexities and things here that are just they don't map well to the traditional world. And so part of the job of the custodian in Anchorage is making not only the safest system possible, but a system that is usable. Because if a system is not usable, people will just not use it or will skirt the security components to achieve their final goal, but at the risk of actually losing all their assets.
Let's talk about, there was recently an announcement, Facebook has launched, or co-launched what's called the Libra Association, which you guys are part of. Mm-hmm. And it's gotten a lot of attention, and some people think it's exciting, some people think it's not as exciting, maybe in the crypto world. Can you tell us why you decided to do that and what you think of it?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's interesting. We've been involved in the initiative even before it was called Libra. So we've been talking to Facebook about it for about 1.5 years now. So it's been a long, long time. Yeah. Basically when there was only 2 people on the team, which now is, as you know, a very big team that is working on this initiative. I would definitely not say that it's Facebook that is launching it. And I think that one of the most exciting things about this initiative is the fact that there's this Libra Association, which is an independent association. It is headquartered in Geneva in Switzerland. And it's independent from Facebook. The operations are being funded by the members that are participating in the actual Libra Association. And it's a completely independent entity that is going to actually solve a lot of the problems that we've seen on governance of protocols before. And so one of the reasons why we're excited to participate is we, like Facebook, believe in creating open financial networks. And there's this idea that we could have a global currency that can actually go across borders, that is digital. There's never been a truly digital global currency that is have massive use and has adoption. And so part of the reasons why we're excited is because a lot of the problems that we see on the current assets that have somehow hindered adoption are being addressed by Libra. The first one is volatility. So one of the things that people say about assets that are store of value is that they are not a medium of exchange. People want to hold on to them instead of transacting. They want to hold on to them because they believe it will appreciate in value. And so the way that Libra solves that.
Like I mean, we're big fans of Bitcoin, but everyone talks about the person who bought, the pizza with Bitcoin that would now be worth $60 million. And so why would you want to spend something if you believe it's going to go up in value?
That's exactly right. And so that's obviously a problem that you need to solve if you want an actual global currency, which is very much the explicit goal of Libra, is to have a global currency that can be accepted and can bring financial inclusion to a lot of people that currently don't have access to it. So the way that it's solved is it's a fully backed global currency, and it's solved by having what we call the Libra Reserve, in which there's government issued bonds and other stable assets in US dollars and pounds and euros that are backing the reserve. And so it will not track, it is not a stable currency in the sense that it's not pegged to US dollar or to one specific asset, and it's actually independent from any one asset, but it has stability because it's backed by low volatility assets. So that's one of the big things that Libra Association is trying to achieve that is very exciting. Second thing is obviously on scalability. So number of transactions that the current blockchains that are completely permissionless can do is on the dozens of transactions a second. And one of the stated goals of the Libra blockchain is, can we scale to thousands, several thousands of transactions per second to get closer to what an actual global currency requires? If you don't have thousands of transactions per second, this is a common criticism, you can't actually support the load on all of these networks. The third thing that is incredibly exciting and might be the most exciting thing about Libra is that the players that are coming to the association around the table already have billions of users. They already have the relationships with billions of users. They also are merchants in their own right, so they can actually incentivize people to participate in this global currency. And so they have effectively solved the bootstrapping problem, the chicken and egg problem of, do we first have merchant adoption and then users, or do we first have users and then merchant adoption? How about both at the same time? And so that is a very unique position to be in, and why part of the exciting opportunity is there.
I would also add the fourth thing, which is, from my understanding, Libra has made a lot of what I think are correct choices in the design of the blockchain, including making the code open source. And one of the features of a well-designed blockchain is, no matter what you might think of, Facebook, for example, if you don't trust Facebook or whatever, if the blockchain is correctly designed and the code is open source and auditable, you don't need to trust them, right? You just have to trust the code. And at least as I understand it, the decisions they've made are consistent with that, and also consistent with allowing third-party developers, wallet makers, et cetera, to build on top of that blockchain in a permissionless way.
That's right, and I think one of the things that we have to realize is, look, from a perspective of Anchorage, Anchorage is completely agnostic in terms of assets. We support all assets. We actually fundamentally believe that the custodian should not dictate the investment strategy of the investor. And so we support dozens of assets, and all of them have equal importance within Anchorage itself. However, it is very fair to say that the creation of a global currency with open source software, with a new type of consensus protocol that actually gets higher throughput and actually real attempt to solve issues around governance and around stability of the network, is really a raising tide that raises all boats. So we do see this as something that is just beneficial for the ecosystem, not competing with any of the current assets, not attempting to replace any of the current assets, but really just adding to the space, creating yet another attempt at, in this one, a very good one with very good backers, at creating this dream of a global currency.
I think. Sorry. Go ahead.
I was just going to say the other thing that's really exciting about it from our background, we've come from places that were just incredibly focused on consumer usability. If you look at Square and the simplicity that they kind of weaved through their entire product experience. Same story at Docker for developers, just making things easy to use. It's one of the things we haven't quite gotten to the point where that's really solved within crypto, within blockchain. But it is clear that the people in the Libra Association are organizations that make that their bread and butter, just making things very easy to use. And that is clearly going to be both good for the Libra Association itself and the token there, but also for the rest of cryptocurrency to have kind of like usable interaction where people on a day-to-day basis can actually be experiencing cryptocurrency. To the rise all boats kind of analogy, I think it's very important to get that mainstream usability.
I think one analogy might be AOL on the internet. So AOL, they sent out hundreds of millions of disks, CD-ROMs to give people, the ability. It was their first experience going online, downloading software to let them get online. They got to experience, sort of chat rooms and browsing, and then that was sort of a gateway into the broader internet and all the other things that we now have today. And so, the way I view it is that this could be, you get wallets in the hands of billions of people. You get, you help evangelize these concepts with governments and regulators and various other large companies and banks, and sort of all these people start to sort of, you kind of normalize it, you mainstream it, and then those same resources and attitudes can then apply to all of the other kinds of interesting cryptocurrencies that we're all big fans of. And so I think it could be a really big moment to grow the entire space.
Totally agreed. Yep. And from our side, as you know, Anchorage deals with a lot of institutions. And one of the things that is already clear is that there's a lot of excitement of players such as Facebook and such as Stripe and such as PayPal coming into the space in a very meaningful way and participating in these opportunities, because it legitimizes the whole space. Yep. It legitimizes their investment in cryptocurrency that has the goal of being a global currency. And all of their other investments now look like they're different risk profiles, but they're equally legitimate. And so that just helps us a lot. The fact that Facebook is coming out with this and bootstrap this process, and now it's being handed off to the Libra Association. It is also a very thoughtful way of doing governance, and actually sets a new standard for what the transparency is and what it should look like for other cryptocurrencies. So that's pretty exciting too.
So tell me more about what you're going to be doing as a founding member of the Libra Association.
So as a founding member, again, we've been involved in this for almost 1.5 years, but as a founding member of the Libra Association, we're going to do 3 main things. First one is we're going to be running a node. So we're going to actively be running the software on the network. We're going to be one of the 100 nodes on this proof of stake Byzantine fault tolerant protocol, the Libra blockchain and Libra BFD, which is, by the way, a modification of hot stuff. And so we are going to be running a node. We're going to be sending transactions and just help the network converge and get to consensus. The second component is we're going to be actively involved in the decisions, governance decisions of the Libra Association. So there's 100 members on the association. Each of the members gets 1 vote. So Anchorage is going to have 1 vote. Any concern that any one institution is going to have more sway into the association is unfounded, because all of the associations will have the exact same power. All of them will have 1 vote.
And these members include investors like us, sort of crypto companies like you guys.
That's right,
NGOs, consumer internet companies like Uber and Lyft.
That's right. Universities, they also include social impact partners, which are people that are just focused on different things than we are.
It's deliberately chosen to be kind of a balanced set.
That's exactly right. And so no single entity will be able to overpower the other entities. We'll all be in equal footing in terms of governance. And part of the involvement of Anchorage and why we were selected in the first place is the fact that, as you'd expect, we bring deep expertise in the areas that are necessary for a blockchain to be successful. So we bring deep expertise in distributed systems and security. We bring deep expertise in cryptography.
Open source governance. I mean, a lot of the work we did at Docker was on open source projects that were kind of community owned and kind of use the same kind of consensus, informal consensus between people that Libra will be doing in terms of running things, keeping it kind of a commons that everyone owns.
That's right. Ultimately, the success of this network will not just be from a technical underpinning, but also be the association itself and how the governance decisions there are going to be driven forward. So we've been giving feedback on the papers that have been coming out, on the technical components, non-technical components, and so we've been big fans since the beginning, and we're going to be continuously involved in the initiative.
Great. Thanks for joining the A16Z YouTube channel. Thank you guys for being here.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us, Chris.